Welcome to everybody gathered here today. Good Shabbos. For our next few sacraments of Shabbat, we're going to be discussing the topic of spiritual rebirth. We have discussed it in passing before, and we'll discuss it again today and probably many more times in the future. It's a very important part of Mar Yeshua's historical teachings. So first we have to define what is spiritual rebirth. Spiritual rebirth is to be born again, to experience the birth from above, and it's also termed spiritual regeneration. Spiritual rebirth is an advanced spiritual initiation Mar Yeshua, the Master Jesus, gave to his sincere disciples. To be spiritually regenerated or born again, one must purify his or her heart and consciousness and act to serve and uplift the vulnerable in his or her community. There is the old or first Adam, humanity, which is associated with selfishness and has a fearful relationship with God. We find this first Adam in Genesis, the first book of the Torah, and we see the story of Adam and Eve, etc. It's very important to understand that Adam, Ben Adam, or son of humanity, Adam wasn't just one person. He wasn't one man. He wasn't the first man. Adam means human, humanity. So Ben Adam in Hebrew, Bar Anash in Aramaic, means this first Adam, this first humanity that was emanated from the Elohim. Elohim means gods. Uh, so it emanated from El, or God, El Elyon, the highest, and also those emanations of God, most likely archangels or other divine beings. So the supreme Godhead and other divine emanations grouped together, called Elohim in Genesis, is what is responsible for having created humanity. And again, as you see through the Hebrew Testament and at some points in the Christian Testament, and as is often taught in many churches, especially Protestant churches, we're taught to fear God. And we're taught that if we just pray and just believe, we can have anything, which can make us fairly selfish and self-aggrandizing. But anyhow, the old Adam, this first Adam, was associated with selfishness and had a fearful relationship with God. Such a being that is born from the first Adam, which is all of us, we're all part of this first Adam. Such a one like us can be reborn into the new humanity. The second Adam, as it was termed by Paul, or the Baranash, Aramaic. And we can be reborn into this new humanity by following the teachings of the Halakha of Mar Yeshua, or the authentic teachings of great spiritual masters or traditions. Spiritual rebirth or regeneration is not attained during baptismal rites. As most people, if not all people, can attest to, when you're baptized, it may feel good to be included into a church. It's usually an initiation, or becoming part of a particular church is what baptism has become. It's also often believed that baptism gets rid of original sin of Adam and Eve, so to speak. In our tradition, baptism doesn't do any of those things, and it definitely does not imply that you have been spiritually rebirthed or spiritually regenerated, because most people after baptism behave the same way they always have. At best, they have an excuse for their mistakes. They say, oh, Jesus will forgive my sins. I just need to believe in Jesus Christ and his death and resurrection, and then all of my sins are forgiven. But yet, most people's behaviors, their core personality, their core characteristics tend not to change. With spiritual rebirth, which is an advanced initiation or an advanced experience given by Mar Yeshua or other great spiritual masters in the body or beyond the body. Spiritual rebirth is a total transformation of consciousness. It is illumination of consciousness with God's light, and you are imbued with God's love so much so that you can't help but see all as God and serve all as God. We will know when we experience spiritual rebirth because we'll feel ourselves to be one with all creation, one with all humanity, and we will feel a union with God. One who is spiritually reborn, regenerated, is superior to John the Baptist. Mar Yeshua does describe this in the Christian Testament too, but I really find Logian 46 from Gospel of Thomas to be very beautiful. Among those born of women, from Adam until John the Baptist, there is no one so superior to John the Baptist that his eyes should not be lowered in his presence. Yet I have said, whichever one of you comes into being as a newly born Yeled, knows or experiences the Malkuth and becomes superior to John. So here, Jesus is saying and expressing that of all people, of all humanity, since the emanation of Adam, the first humanity, up to this point in history of John the Baptist, who is Mar Yeshua's teacher, his spiritual master, there is no one superior to John the Baptist that his eyes shouldn't be lowered. In other words, John was so great that you had to avert your gaze because it was to honor his presence. Yet I have said, whichever one of you comes into being as a newly born Yeled, knows or experiences the Malkuth and becomes superior to John. So here we see it in this area. Let's see if I can get my mouse to work here so I can point at it. Yet I have said, whichever one of you comes into being as a newly born Yeled, knows, experiences the Malkuth. So comes into being is the expression that is often translated as being reborn in the Bible, or to be born again. Jesus is saying one that comes into being as a newly born baby knows the Malkuth. This has many different applications. I'm going to keep it simple today, and then we can expand on it to deeper and deeper meanings. But a Yeled is a newborn baby before that Jewish baby experiences circumcision. Sorry, I had to think of the word. My mind's a little bit tired today. Pardon me. So it's a tiny baby, not even 8 days old yet. And such a being is very innocent. And so, we see in the Gospel of John that Nicodemus seems so confused, but how can somebody be born again? How can we go into our mother's womb and be born again? It's really silly because if you read the Greek, you understand that this isn't a birth from a mother. And we understand this also in the Gospel of Thomas, which is written in Coptic. The Coptic word used for being born of a woman is not used in this Logian. What is used is the Coptic word for to be, to exist, to come into being. Thus, spiritual regeneration is going from one state of being to a new, more refined spiritual state of being, which implies a type of illumination of consciousness, an expansion of consciousness, God or Christ consciousness. So what's implied is that John the Baptist had not attained this fullness, this freedom, this regeneration, or at least not the type or exact kind of regeneration that Jesus was selling to his disciples, so to speak. So no matter how great John the Baptist was, and Jesus said that he was better than any other being that had been born up to that date, he said, whichever one of us becomes spiritually rebirthed or spiritually regenerated is greater to John and will experience the Malkuth of God. Malkuth is often translated as kingdom of God, as a king domain, as a place. But Malkuth should be understood as the sovereignty of God, the rulership of God, the kingship of God, but it's not a kingdom, a place. It's not a king domain. Whenever a being is spiritually reborn into the Baranash new humanity, into the communion of saints, these great perfected beings, these great tzaddiks, they share in a portion of God's sovereignty, in a portion of God's rulership, in a portion of God's kingship. And they use this in the capacity of a great spiritual servant of God, or a great spiritual son or daughter of God. They are empowered to help with the evolution of humanity, the earth, and the emanated universe. Let's look at John chapter 3, verse 3 more deeply. The first verse on top here is a very common type of translation of John 3:3. Verily, truly, I tell you, no one can see the kingdom of God without being born from above. Many gospels will say, verily, I tell you, no one can see the kingdom of God without being born again. So this translation from the New Oxford Annotated Bible with Apocrypha, it's actually more accurate. Very truly, I tell you, no one can see the Malkuth of God, the sovereignty of God, the sovereignties of God, without being born from above. Now, for deeper meaning, let's look at Louis Kaiser's rendition of this same verse from the pre-Christian teachings of Yeshua. Unless one comes into being from the heavens, min hashamayim, he cannot see the vision of the Malkuth of God. This gives the context and the meaning of this verse as it should be. So the first thing we have to understand is the word see. Everybody translates this as no one can see the kingdom of heaven. And we think that the seeing is with our physical eyes. The Greek word for see actually means to experience a vision as in a clairvoyant vision, as in a psychic vision, as in to see not with the physical eyes, but to see with the spirit. So he cannot experience a vision of the Malkuth of God unless he experiences spiritual regeneration. So unless one comes into being from the heavens, unless you have a rebirth of heavenly consciousness, God consciousness, Christ consciousness, then you can't have a vision or an experience of the sovereignties of God. The sovereignty of God is God's rulership over all of creation, not just this earth that we live on and that we experience in our waking consciousness, but also the sovereignty of God covers all of the olamim, all of the spiritual realms beyond this earth. There are two olams that we experience regularly. There is the day sky and the night sky. And then the third olam contains both the Garden of Eden and Gehenna, which is a purgatorial place of purification, as believed by Jesus. And then as you go higher and higher, you get to more elevated levels where there are different spiritual beings that are described to be in these spiritual realities. So one that becomes spiritually regenerated or spiritually rebirthed or experiences the birth from above or the birth from the heavens, then that spiritual being, that perfected one, can have a vision of the olamim, or the spiritual realities beyond this reality that we see and experience with our eyes. This is encapsulated by the Hermetic saying, as above, so below, as within, so without. And of course, this comes from the teachings of Hermes Trismegistus. Hermes was actually venerated by the early church fathers. He was the one great spiritual being or spiritual patron of the primordial tradition that actually the church fathers honored and respected for some time before they just kind of dropped him. But even in the different codexes found at Nag Hammadi, which was a great discovery of the so-called Gnostic Gospels, many teachings of Hermes were found in those codices. When will we have a vision of the Baranash? This final gospel verse for the day is what we'll share. So this comes from Gospel of Thomas Logian 37. His disciples asked, when will the Baranash, the new humanity, be revealed to us? And when shall we see him? Jesus answered, when you disrobe without being ashamed, and take up your garments, and place them under your feet like little children and tread on them, then you shall see the Son of the Living One, and you are not afraid. Let's read it again. His disciples asked, when will the Baranash be revealed to us? And when shall we see him? Jesus answered, when you disrobe without being ashamed, and take up your garments and place them under your feet, like little children, and tread on them, then you see the Son of the Living One, and you are not afraid. So let's talk about this verse. Of course, the Baranash means son of humanity. It's the same thing as Ben Adam. Baranash is the Aramaic version of the Hebrew Ben Adam, which means son of humanity. The Baranash is the purified second Adam, or new humanity, in which we all purify ourselves one by one through spiritual practice until we join this communion of perfected beings, great illuminated saints. And these beings, these individual Baranash of the whole Baranash corporate Messiah, anointed new humanity. A Baranash can be an individual that is in flesh, and so it refers to an individual, but also Baranash refers to all of the communion of saints who exist in the Ogdoad, or the eighth Olam, or eighth spiritual sphere of the Enochian scheme, what we read in the books of Enoch. So they're asking, when will we have a vision of the Baranash? Or when will we experience the Baranash? When will we come into existence or transfer from this state of being to this purified state of being called the Baranash corporate Messiah? That's what the disciples are asking Mar Yeshua, the Master Jesus. And Jesus said, when you disrobe without being ashamed, then you shall see the Son of the Living One. So disrobed means two things in my mind. Disrobe can mean that you physically leave the body at the time of death, at the time of clinical death. So the robe or your garments is your physical flesh. So one option is that whenever you leave your body at the time of death, when our spirits go wherever spirits go, if you're not ashamed at that time, meaning that you are spiritually evolved and you're not attached to materiality, and you're not drowning in material desires and attachments, at that point, you can experience the Son of the Living One. And note that the Son is the Baranash. It doesn't mean just the singular Son. Son means humanity, the new humanity, the Baranash of the Living One, of God, the living God. So you can see or have a vision of, or experience, or come into being with the Baranash when you leave your physical body at the time of death. We'll talk more about that in a second. Let's read the rest of the verse. When you disrobe without being ashamed and take up your garments and place them under your feet like little children and tread on them, then you see the Son of the Living One, the Baranash, the new humanity of the Living One, in a vision, divine vision, or you see them or experience them in a spiritual sphere like the Ogdoad. So when you disrobe and you place your garments under your feet, that means you have transcended material desires. You've transcended bodily consciousness, bodily attachments, material attachments, things that bring our attention to the world and take our attention away from God or away from our spiritual goals. So when you disrobe and you put your garments under your feet, that means that you've transcended desire. That you are now a master of yourself. Your soul is awakened, illumined, and you are now the master from within is what guides you. And the master within is your soul, your higher self. So again, when you disrobe, that can mean at the time of death, but also great saints do not need to die. You don't need to die to experience God of the Baranash. There are many different inner secret spiritual teachings of Mar Yeshua that let you experience in ecstatic visions the different spiritual spheres in which the sovereignty of God rules over, the various olamim, or eons, as it is called in Greek. So to disrobe can also mean to just take off or leave off all material attachment. So a lot of people will interpret this as meaning, as Louis Kaiser does in the Christian teachings of Yeshua, he kind of implies that this is, you get this vision whenever you die. So at death, we can have the vision, the divine vision of the Baranash. However, this may be for those who are regenerated and those who have progressed significantly spiritually, but are not yet shalem and tam, whole and perfect. So I believe that this phrase is meant to serve two purposes. One, it's meant to describe a living saint that disrobes or takes off all material attachments, but they're still living in this sphere, in this reality, in this earth sphere that we all experience and live in. So I do believe that this verse can refer to a living Sadiq or perfected Jewish saint or saint of any tradition for that matter. So it's for the regenerated, but it is also for those who have progressed significantly. And at the time of death, they have a vision of the Baranash new humanity and the Ogdoad. Many people, when they have near-death experiences, they see light, they see divine beings or divine visions. So when people approach death or die, they may experience such a divine vision. But this doesn't mean that they've been spiritually rebirthed or that they're illumined saints, perfected beings. But those who have lived a very sanctified life, a life that has a lot of spiritual focus, oftentimes in the Garden of Eden, in the third Olam, they will experience divine visions of the Baranash, which can communicate with lesser evolved spiritual beings at that level. And this is kind of like a reward for having lived a good life. But if you haven't been fully spiritually reborn, which is also synonymous with resurrection or kima, then we have to reincarnate. We have to come down and take on a new body and a new personality and keep on working out the unfolding of our spiritual path until we are whole, one with God, one with creation, one with all of humanity, and until we have perfected ourselves, meaning we have conquered our lower desires and urges, etc. So this is a description of what spiritual rebirth is. Spiritual rebirth entails disrobing and standing above or transcending your garments, which means your bodily consciousness and your bodily attachments to the world. Only a spiritually reborn person will be non-attached to both body and material possessions and the world, everything that encapsulates our material reality. They are beyond it. It doesn't mean we can't enjoy material things. We can't enjoy having a body. We should enjoy these gifts that God has given us, but it means that we prioritize God and spirituality first, which brings permanent joy. Nothing in this world can bring permanent joy except for God, the experience of our soul, and the union of soul and God. That is the only permanent joy there is. Everything else will disappoint you. Everything else will dissolve. Everything else will go away, no matter how good it is now. So yes, we should appreciate our houses. We should appreciate our jobs, our children, anything in this world that we love and that we enjoy and that we cherish. We should fully appreciate that as a gift from God. But we should know that everything is impermanent except for the experience of God, the experience of our soul, and the union of soul and God together. That experience, that eternal reality is the only permanent joy we have. And when you experience that reality, that emergence, that marriage of soul with God, marriage of soul with Baranash, then you can say you have been spiritually reborn. But sprinkling a little bit of water on your head and saying, I believe in this and I reject that, will not make you an illumined being. Baptism in this tradition simply says, I am seriously following the halakha of Mar Yeshua. And you don't even need to be Christian to do that. You can be a Hindu, you can be a Buddhist, you can be a whatever you are, you can be a nothing. But if you read Mar Yeshua's teachings, his historical teachings, and you say, wow, this is really intelligent. I want to embody this in my life. I want to act on this. I want to do this. Then baptism is seen as a solemn vow to step onto the path of Mar Yeshua's halakha and teachings. And when we do the halakha, when we do the teachings every day, then we can perfect ourselves. Then we can become whole, experience union of soul with God. And that is when you are spiritually reborn. When you are spiritually, when we all start off as the first Adam. When we purify and sanctify ourselves through spiritual teachings, we are reborn from above. We are spiritually reborn into a second humanity. This second humanity prioritizes God, prioritizes joy, prioritizes love, prioritizes service and lifting up of all of humanity. And mystically, you experience unity with all of creation, all of humanity, and with God. And when you experience spiritual rebirth, you will know you have. It's not poetry. It's not a belief, but it is an experience that results from constant spiritual doing. You don't need to believe anything or accept any doctrine to be spiritually reborn or regenerated, but you do have to live a spiritual life. Spirituality is different from religion. Spirituality is different from doctrine or dogma, but you have to live a spiritual life by following the teachings of a spiritual master. And when you make that the center or the priority of your life, then you purify yourself and you experience expanded and more expansive consciousness until you see yourself and everyone else. When all of humanity becomes your expanded self, then you are reborn into the second Adam, the Baranash, the son of mankind, corporate Messiah. And just to sum up this verse, yes, it is possible for a very spiritual advanced being to become illumined or become a true Baranash, a true perfected one at the point of death. But it's very rare that at the point of death that this happens. You really have to be far along the path, and it's for the relative few. We take on these bodies for the purpose of purifying our consciousness and purifying our actions, both in this life and in prior existences. until we purify ourselves fully, we'll keep on taking bodies. Gilgul or reincarnation is all through the Hebrew Testament, all through the Christian Testament, and is alluded to in the Gnostic Gospels also. Whenever we're fully purified, we no longer need to take on a body. So yes, it is possible to experience enlightenment or illumination or oneness with God forever at the time of death. But it's much better that while you have a body, which is given to us for the purpose of evolution, spiritual evolution, we want to become illumined while living. There is no guarantees at the point of death that you'll become illumined. But if you work really hard, if you love fully, if you do with your whole heart, then anybody can become a Varnash in this lifetime. So many spiritual traditions talk about the fact that you need millions of lives to become enlightened or illumined. It's not true. If you make the decision now to become illumined and to act in such a way that is in accordance with illumination, then you can become illumined very quickly. My spiritual master, she likes to give out little Hershey's kisses as blessings to those that come to her for blessings and spiritual advice. And one time there was a guy meditating in the audience, her audience, and he was closing his eyes, and all of a sudden he felt these little hits on the point between the eyebrows, the so-called third eye. And when he opened his eyes, he saw that my spiritual master was perfectly aiming Hershey's kisses and pegging him right in between the eyes. And he said to my master, "Oh my gosh, I've missed a great opportunity. I wasn't aware of this, but you know, this could have been the moment of illumination if I was paying attention," meaning the attention he was getting from a true saint. And he said, and then he had doubt, and he said, "Oh, but I couldn't become enlightened right now." And my spiritual master said, "It is true because you said it." If we believe, it can be so. But if you believe you can't be enlightened in this lifetime, then it won't be so, because you're working against your own mind, against your own will. If your divine will is in accordance with God's will, and you desire to spiritually grow and be rebirthed and be illumined in this lifetime, it will happen now. Enlightenment is in this moment, in this breath. Enlightenment is in the present. Enlightenment is never in the future. If you want enlightenment, you have to take it now. Let us close with the second blessing. Second cup of blessing. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother of the Universe, thank you for this time we share together in talking about and acting upon the teachings of Mar Yeshua. May you be our priority. May we constantly seek you. May we constantly knock on the door and seek you and enter into you and become one with you. May we become spiritually reborn from the old Adam to the new Adam. May we become reborn into the communion of saints. May love and light and sharing be our community's goals. Amen, amen, amen. Good Shabbos, everybody. I'll see you next time.